Thanks again, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. As I mentioned, I think it's worth noting still that I'm still a card-carrying member of the ACLU, and I'm thrilled that so many of you are as well. On behalf of our board and staff, I want to thank each of you for your continued support of our organization. Your ongoing generosity and encouragement and commitment to the work that we're doing inspires all of us who are doing this work as staff members every single day, and we are truly grateful for your continued support. As we mark our 90th year protecting civil liberties and civil rights, we are committed to achieving systemic change that will empower all Marylanders to exercise their rights so the law values and uplifts their humanity. Our 2024 strategic plan is designed to ensure the rights of Black Marylanders and others who were not included at the state's founding nor in any of its founding documents. Through our plan, we'll be focusing on specifically voting rights, education equity, the legal justice system, immigrants' rights, government accountability, and individual autonomy. I'm also delighted to share some really great news today. Just in the last 48 hours, we have been successful in an appeal with the Fourth Circuit that our appeal regarding spy planes in Baltimore was overturned, and the government will no longer be able to have spy planes in the city. In addition, a gentleman who has been incarcerated for 40 some years he will be able to come home in the next several weeks, and we are delighted about that. Again, members of this team who you'll hear from today and others were involved in that work, and we're very excited to share that with you. I want to talk a little bit both our history and our vision for the future. Interestingly, in 1931, when the ACLU of Maryland was first formed, the first case was on behalf of a Black man on the Eastern Shore named Orphan Jones, who was charged with the murder, denied counsel, and threatened with lynching. This early work laid the foundation for the central role that racial equity and racial justice in particular plays in our organization today. And while there is much to celebrate over the last 9 decades, sadly, our work remains even more urgent now. So in 1931, we supported Orphan Jones, Mr. Orphan Jones. 90 years later, we're seeking justice for another Black man, a 19-year-old Black man who was murdered by police on the Eastern Shore. We're working with Talbot County community leaders to remove Maryland's last Confederate monument on government grounds. We're suing the state of Maryland to finally provide and implement constitutionally required funding for school children in Baltimore. We're working to remove barriers that impede the lives and livelihoods for immigrant families in Frederick County. And we're working every day to make sure that voting accessibility is available in every jurisdiction, as well as expanding the vote so that Marylanders who are incarcerated also have access to that most sacred right of citizenship. What's most powerful and telling to me about the last 90 years is we've got a lot done and we have much, much more to do. The ACLU of Maryland's race equity work has started with recognizing that our organization, just like every institution in the United States that we interact with or that we're a part of, operates within a system of white supremacy. The ACLU and other historically white-led organizations are also privileged through white supremacy with greater resources and power. We also understand that the ACLU of Maryland operates within institutions like the executive branch, legislative branch, and the judicial branches of government that were founded on and sustained by white supremacy. And through our 2024 strategic plan, we're working to make systemic difference in all of those areas and more. The power of our country has always been with the people, and the power in Maryland has always been with Marylanders. Many of you on this call today, other donor members across the state who've supported us through coalitions, who've led us and advised us in those coalitions, And even with a Biden-Harris administration, we still have much work to do to protect our rights and liberties. The 2020 election taught us many things. Most importantly is that when we remove barriers and expand access to the ballot, citizens are able to vote in record numbers. I think it's important to let folks know that even though we're in Maryland and not one of the states where legislatures are trying to overturn and put more barriers in the way of people voting, we can take nothing for granted. And we always want to make sure that we're working toward making sure and protecting that sacred right of citizenship, the access to the vote, the ability to vote without any reservation or impediment. That's why we're committed to realizing an election infrastructure that guarantees universal suffrage and robust access to the ballot. As I mentioned before, including Marylanders who are currently incarcerated. I'd also like to thank many of you who had the opportunity to join us back in December for the premiere of our film, Expand the Vote. And you're able to look at that. It's on our website if you'd like to see it or share it with others as well. The ACLU of Maryland does not just name the problems. We advocate for systemic solutions. I thank you again so much for joining us, not just today in this important work, but every day previously over the past 90 years, as well as the 90 years to come. Thank you so much for participating and again for your support. Now I'd like to turn it to my colleague, Sonia Kumar, Senior Staff Attorney.
Thank you, Dana. Could we have our slides up? Thank you. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for recognizing as a group that our legal justice system is one of the core human rights crises in our state. I want to just take a moment to help put some information in context. We tend to think of Maryland as one of the most progressive states in the country, and in a lot of ways we are. But we have a human rights crisis in our state, and that is the extremely racially disproportionate incarceration of Black people. US leads the world in incarceration, and Maryland leads the nation in racial disparities in our prison system. And that's why our affiliate has prioritized bringing home our Black community members and Black elders who are in prisons. To give you just a snapshot, nearly 80% of the people serving life sentences in the Maryland prison system are Black. Our state is 30% Black. Maryland actually beats out states like Mississippi and Alabama in the number and rate at which we incarcerate Black people. And so if you've heard of Brian Stevenson or Just Mercy or the Equal Justice Initiative, please understand that the very same issues that are playing out in places like Mississippi and Alabama have been occurring right here in Maryland for decades in every part of our state. But we have some good news on that front. Could we have the next slide up? For those of you who have been with us for a while, you will know that for a long time, our affiliate has prioritized partnerships with people serving life with parole sentences and their families who are fighting for a second chance. And through these longstanding partnerships, we have worked on every different kind of sort of strategic front that we can. And we've had some extraordinary victories, including in this last year. So in this last year, we successfully settled our longstanding lawsuit on behalf of those who were sentenced to life as children. This case has become a model for litigation in other states as well, relating to the second chances for those serving life imprisonment who were sentenced as children. We passed historic legislation removing the governor from parole. Maryland's one of only 3 states in the country where only the governor can parole someone serving a life sentence. And that's politicized the process and functionally abolished Maryland's parole system for lifers for many years. This is a change that lifers led and fought for decades, and we're very excited about this change. We're not done yet. The governor vetoed the bill, and we're going to be going back for an override in January, and we'll need your help with that. But it's still a historic victory. Building on these successes, we helped establish the Maryland Parole Partnership to connect people serving life sentences with pro bono counsel. There's no right to counsel in parole, and so free lawyers is a huge support that we can provide our partners. This initiative is particularly unique in that we are very directly led by lifers who have survived Maryland's broken parole system, including the gentleman pictured on our slide, Calvin McNeil, who was denied on 3 different occasions by Maryland governors before winning his right to come home in court. And on that note, one of our key successes over the last year was helping to spur the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office to establish a sentencing review unit, revisiting very extreme sentences like those of Mr. McNeil. And he was the pioneer for that unit. His case was the first case to go through that unit, and he came home last fall. The result has been that we've had people coming home who've collectively served centuries of time. Could we have the next slide, please? As Dana mentioned, just this week, we had a stunning victory in the case of our client, Kenneth Tucker, who had served nearly half a century behind bars for an offense that took place when he was 17. He's going to turn 65 on Monday, and the first time in almost 50 years, he'll be able to celebrate his birthday with his 85-year-old mom. Next slide, please. We don't have a lot of time, so we'll go through it quickly. We also wanted to make sure that all of you were aware of the historic case of Anton Black. He's pictured here. Over the last few years, the issue of police violence has, of course, come to the forefront of our national consciousness, but still too many people are being killed. It's also a problem right here in our state in Maryland. For years, our affiliate has worked with families who have lost their loved ones to police to try to seek systemic change that will hopefully end police violence against Black people. One of the ways we have sought to do that, and one of the names we hope you will remember, is that of Anton Black. Anton was only 19 when he was murdered by 3 white police officers on the Eastern Shore after they pinned him down for several minutes, much like the killing of George Floyd, whose case, of course, has gotten global attention. At least one of the officers who was involved in killing Anton had been hired despite a very long and well-documented history of violence against Black people. The white police chief who defended the hiring said he had talked to him and believed he deserved a second chance. It's hard to capture the breadth of the wrongs that led to Anton's death, but we also want to make sure that we are educating our donors, and the public about the way justice is not served after someone is killed by police, and highlighting the complicity of other institutions besides police in perpetuating police violence. Among the many failures that followed, one was particularly salient, and that was that Maryland's medical examiner did not rule that police killed Anton. Rather, the medical examiner ruled that he died of alternatingly natural causes or an accident, and further ruled that bipolar disorder was a contributing cause of death, but not the police restraint holding him down, face down to the ground for 6 minutes or more. So when we filed suit together with co-counsel on behalf of Anton's family last fall, we also filed suit against the medical examiner for covering up his death and preventing us from learning the truth and full acknowledgement of his murder. We highlighted in our lawsuit several examples of cases where the medical examiner has done precisely this. minimizing or disregarding the very direct police role in causing a person's death. The consequence of that has been, of course, that officers are not charged, but also that we're not learning about how people are dying or how people are killing them, and we're not preventing those deaths. The case was moving forward, and we were shocked when it took on sort of a national tinge earlier this year, when we learned that Maryland's former medical examiner, one of the defendants in the lawsuit, was going to be a star witness for the defense of Derek Chauvin in the murder of George Floyd. Just like he did in Maryland, Dr. Fowler in the George Floyd case wrongly claimed that everything but the police use of force was responsible for the taking of George Floyd's life. And we hope that his actions on that national stage led to a further outcry when Maryland's former DC's former medical examiner urged an investigation into all of the prior rulings of police custody cases right here in Maryland. So although the Maryland AG has since indicated that some review will take place, we are going to continue working with Anton Black's family and the family of others to seek justice for Anton Black, but also to help ensure that our systems are structurally improving going forward. And with that, I will turn it over to my excellent colleague, Kaelin Young, who's the Director of Public Policy.
Thank you, Sonia, and just a significant kudos to the work that you all are doing, and to the donors. You're going to hear throughout some of the things that I say and my partners and colleagues say, some overlap in some of the work that we do and how different departments are working together on different parts of the legal justice system to try to affect change, and significant change indeed. I'm ready for the slides. So the first slide that you'll see is a slide that really just outlines some of the demands that we had in working with partners in coalition for the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability. I want to give a brief shout out to Yannette Emanuel, our public policy advocate in the public policy team, for her hard work organizing, as you can see on this slide, 60+ organizations. That number is actually now over 90+ organizations that came together behind these 5 demands: repealing the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, restoring local control of Baltimore City Police Department, opening up MPIA, Maryland Public Information Act investigations to make them transparent, creating a statewide use of force standard, and removing law enforcement from our schools. Ready for the next slide. So coming off of what Sonia just talked about, with the case of Anton Black, also came the bill called Antons Law, which was sponsored by Senator Joe Carter and Delegate Gabriel Acevedo. This law, there are 3 buckets when it comes to the Maryland Public Information Act. First, there's the mandatory non-disclosure of certain information. Second, there's the discretionary disclosure of certain information. And then, of course, there's the mandatory disclosure. Mandatory disclosure of information includes government documents and things that are pertaining to laws, et cetera. Mandatory non-disclosure includes, or before this law was passed, included certain personnel records of police misconduct. In other words, a victim or family of a victim, such as Anton Black's family, could not get certain information about the officers and their disciplinary records, so that way they could have transparency in how the investigation was done or their previous misconduct. Antons Law moves all of that information from the mandatory non-disclosure, meaning if they asked by law, they could never get it, to the discretionary disclosure, meaning they can ask and get it. And if they get denied, they have the opportunity to appeal. This law is important because it's going to help victims of family get justice and have an understanding of what's going on in their cases, where right now or previously they did not. So this is something that you see came out of the case and has transitioned and translated into new law that was just passed this year in legislative session. This is one of our crown achievements, and we're really excited and grateful for the work of our partners, of the legal department, and everyone else who participated in getting this law passed. This is major change. Ready for the next slide. The second bill that I want to highlight very briefly for you all is Women's Prerelease Center, which is actually a bill that got passed last year, but this year, was vetoed by Governor Hogan, and that veto was overwritten by the Maryland General Assembly in January. Our sponsors were Mary Washington and Charlotte Crutchfield. But also what I want to highlight is how this bill really points to how we were able to work with impacted partners and their organizations to create change for people. Specifically, I'm talking about Kiana Johnson from Life After Relief, Monica Cooper from Maryland Justice Project, Nicole Mundell Hansen from Out for Justice. These are all formerly incarcerated Black women who are now leading organizations who came together, and we were able to support their efforts to create a pre-release unit for women. So that way women who are coming out of an incarcerated situation can be transitioned back into society successfully. Right now, there are no, I believe there's one pre-release facility. There used to be more. And now with this bill, by 2023, there will be a new one in Baltimore supporting those women. That's great work. Next slide. Thank you so much. And so the next two slides that I have, which are the last two slides, really just highlight some of the legislative outcomes that we've had, some of the major outcomes. And there are more bills that got passed, but this list right here are some of the things that I wanted to just highlight for you all that we got passed just this session. Again, we overrode the veto for pre-release. We were able to establish what I would say is the strongest use of force standard in the country, only rivaled by that in Vermont, which creates a necessary and proportionate standard. Use of force can only occur when necessary and proportionate to the threat that is perceived by the officer. That's the strongest standard in the country, and it's a step up from the current constitutional floor that has allowed for officers to escape accountability. Again, Antons Law we passed. Senate Bill 525, central booking ballot drop box, will place a drop box for the first time at Baltimore City Central Booking facility. So that way those individuals who are eligible to vote, but who are currently incarcerated, will have easy access to submit their ballot in the very next election. We created a bill that will set a pathway to restore local control of the Baltimore City Police Department. It's the only department of its size that is not controlled by the local government. It's been that way since the Civil War, and we're changing that. We repealed the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, and we replaced it with something that's going to be more transparent and allows for more civilian participation. There's more work to be done here to create civilian oversight, but what we have here is a major step in the right direction. HB 222, Value My Vote Act, will ensure that individuals who are eligible to vote and who are currently incarcerated will be given voter registration information and absentee ballot information by the Department of Corrections, so that way they can have easy access while they're incarcerated. Because just because you're incarcerated doesn't mean you can't vote, but you can vote if you are only if you're held pretrial or convicted of a misdemeanor. So we're going to help those folks. And then the last thing is Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which is the Curran Commission. I'm going to leave that for Frank Pantanello, who's going to speak after me to talk about some of our education work. Next slide. And then finally, I just want to point out, though, that while we had some significant successes, there is still work to be done. And so there were a few bills that did not make it across the finish line. So as you all are considering how you can be supportive and how you can continue to help us with this work, here are a few places where we know that we've got to continue to educate legislators, but also push and organize to get these bills passed. First and foremost, making sure that public dollars that are spent on private schools, that those schools cannot discriminate discriminate against their students for any reason. That's what Boost is about. Sonia just talked about lifers, which was vetoed by the governor, getting him out of the parole process. We're going to get that veto overridden next session. Also, HB 16, Dignity Not Detention, which also incorporates aspects of the Trust Act, which would prevent 287G programs from being proliferated throughout the state. That bill was also vetoed by the governor. Sergio will talk about that a little bit later, a little bit more about our immigration work, but that's something else that we're going to be doing right away. Youth interrogation, ensuring that young people have access to an attorney when they are questioned by officers, stalled this year. We think it has great prospects for next year. We'll be pushing forward. Marijuana possession and possession with intent to distribute. This increases the legal limit, or the decriminalized limit of marijuana possession from 10 grams to 1 ounce, more in alignment with our states around us. That stalled, but I think next year is going to be a really strong year for marijuana. We should see that pass. And then SROs, removing law enforcement from schools, I think is one of the more heavier lifts that you all can really help us with, where legislators have mixed feelings about law enforcement in schools, and we're hoping to educate them about the impact. And so if you would like to get involved, please reach out, because I think that's going to be a little bit more of a longer term fight. And that's some of the work for the Public Policy Department. Really grateful for your support, really grateful for your activity and helping us do this work. And we look forward to getting some more work done. Thank you so much. Turning it over to Frank Pantanella to talk about education.
Hello and good afternoon. Am I coming through okay? Thumbs up. Thank you. First, I want to say many, many thanks for supporting our work. I've been here since 2007, working on students' right to a quality education, and you are helping us do the hard work of disrupting the status quo, pushing progressive and race equitable policies that challenge the currently flawed and harmful systems that our state and local governments have perpetuated. You're probably familiar with how schools are portrayed in the media, especially in places like Baltimore City. They characterize Black and brown students as violent and can't learn, or their parents don't care or are not involved. They show school facilities falling apart and usually blame local officials or sometimes even the students. And government officials always tout record spending on education and that Baltimore is the third best funded district in the nation, which is completely untrue. So the public isn't getting the full story, and the many of the systemic issues at the core of the problem are rarely mentioned. So I intend to give you a more complete picture of what's happening and what we're doing in schools. Before I came to the ACLU, I was a social worker in a Baltimore City high school for just 1 year. And I can definitively say that Black and brown students are smart, they're eager to learn, and they can learn if given adequate resources, opportunities, and the right cultural, responsive, pedagogical approach to teaching and learning. And in that 1 year when I was a social worker, I saw just about every complaint that I now hear on a daily basis from students and parents. I saw classrooms of 30 plus students and overworked and exhausted teachers, saw students had to wear coats in certain classrooms where the 50-year-old boiler faltered and we missed days due to lack of air conditioning. I remember a room with donated science equipment, and I want to emphasize donated because the state didn't provide the funding for a science lab. And the tables and this equipment was unused because they didn't have the gas hookups. I remember a school nearby that received a donation of 20 new computers, but the aging and out-of-date electrical system couldn't power them. I was the only social worker at the school, and I had a caseload of about 20 students at any given time, and it was way too many to be effective, and there were many more students that needed attention. We didn't have the capacity. And there was barely any fine arts programming in the school. In fact, I used to take students to the piano room or have them draw to get them to open up and get them talking. It worked like a charm, but more importantly, I realized how utterly deprived Baltimore schools are in the arts. And it became a thing. Students learned that I played the piano and they started coming to my office after school asking if I can teach them or help them out with a song they wrote. I ended up helping students put on an end of the year talent show where they showcased their songs, spoken word pieces, dance, and a circus act. They were absolutely starved for the arts and needed to express themselves, and the schools didn't provide these opportunities. And lastly, I remember a time when a teacher brought a student to my room and just said, "Fix him." And while most teachers are hardworking and care about their students, many of them need to understand how their implicit biases further cause damage to Black and brown children who already have experienced significant trauma growing up in communities devastated by racist housing policies, disinvestment, shuttered recreation centers, and over-policing. So what are we doing about all this? I'm proud to say that the ACLU understands the complexity of these issues, and we're pushing forward towards a vision that will ensure that schools have adequate funding for programming, school facilities that are safe, healthy, and equipped for 21st century world-class education. We're working to ensure that Black and brown students are not suspended at higher rates than their white peers for typical behavioral infractions. And we're advocating for life-affirming programs such as restorative approaches, which allow students to express what's bothering them, what's going on internally in their lives. And they learn mediation skills and how to de-escalate situations. This is about dismantling the school to prison pipeline. And most importantly, we're doing this work with community who are most affected by what happens in school and have great ideas and solutions that need consideration. We are using our capacity and credibility to give them a voice at the tables where these decisions are made. So let's get started with education funding. The ACLU got involved with the right to education back in the mid-90s, and we sued the state of Maryland on behalf of a class of parents under the lawsuit Bradford versus the Maryland State Board of Education, which contended that the state was not providing adequate funding for Baltimore City schools as guaranteed by the state constitution. We won the lawsuit in the year 2000, and the state passed a new funding law in 2002, which fundamentally changed the state's flawed funding system. The state now provides more funding for low wealth districts to make up for disparities in wealth among Maryland districts. The law in 2002 phased in $1.3 billion in new state funding between 2002 and 2008. And most of that went to low wealth districts, including Baltimore City. So everything's fine, right? Well, not really. In 2008, the Great Recession hit. The state broke its promise and cut the formula, which prevented planned increases in funding in subsequent years. So where are we now? As you can see, this slide shows the Maryland districts along the bottom axis, going from lowest wealth district to highest wealth district. So Caroline County on the far left is our lowest wealth district, and Worcester County is the highest wealth district, as measured mostly by property taxes and income, personal income. And this graph chart shows where funding is right now in terms of the targets that were set by that law passed in 2002, triggered by our lawsuit. So after they cut the funding, this basically shows, and these are 2017 numbers. It's not completely up to date, but this is what we have. So in the year 2017, the districts in red are the most underfunded. And Baltimore City and Prince George's County, the districts with the highest Black and Latinx population, are the most underfunded in the state. So over the past decade, we've been working with coalition partners on the effort to revise the state education funding formula, which is required by law as a result of our lawsuit. In 2016, the state formed the Kerwin Commission, which was charged with revising the funding formula along with education policies. They put together what they call a world-class plan, recommending that the state prioritize early learning programs for birth to pre-K, pre-K for low-income 3-year-olds, and universal pre-K for all 4-year-olds. They recommended developing new college and career readiness standards and a system for tracking students starting in the 9th grade to ensure that they are on track for meeting the standards. They've recommended a significant increase in funding through new categorical funding for schools with concentrated poverty. And I think ACLU can really take credit here because we were at the forefront of that particular issue. We brought it to the table, and it was shot down a couple times in early meetings, but we kept bringing it back, and others caught on, and finally it made it into the recommendations. And these schools are intended to get much more funding for tutoring programs, after school, mental health, and wraparound services. There's also more money for English language learners and special education. And they recommended elevating the teaching profession to attract and retain teachers. Starting salary will be $60,000, and there's a new career ladder that allows teachers to earn more, gain new responsibilities as leaders while keeping them in the classroom. These recommendations were adopted into law last session, but it was vetoed by the governor, who claimed it was irresponsible given the pandemic. We worked with allies to override the veto this year, so this plan is technically in motion. It's going to take 10 years to phase in the total $3.4 billion called for in the plan. It is great news that this bill passed because there's a lot to be excited about in the bill, and there's a bit more funding, but we have significant concerns, especially with how the formula was designed. Based on my analysis, the funding formula is flawed. I don't think the most underfunded districts in the state are going to be able to decrease class sizes to a manageable level or have enough social workers and full music and art programs. And to put it in simple terms, I believe the formula does not provide enough to low wealth districts and provides too much for wealthy districts. We've done everything that we can legislatively, and so we have to return to court. We filed a new claim under the Bradford lawsuit on behalf of a new class of Baltimore parents. Currently, we are in the discovery phase, which is about gathering data and information and working with national experts that have been retained for the case. And right now, it looks like we have a very strong case that the state is violating its constitutional guarantee to funding Baltimore schools adequately, and that the Kerwin law is not going to meet the constitutional standard. So we will press on and will report out again later on this matter. Now on to school facilities. Like the academic programming, school facilities are also underfunded in Maryland, and Baltimore City, to no surprise, have the oldest and most efficient schools in the state. But we've had a big impact on this issue in recent years. Earlier, I mentioned the aging and faulty heating systems, lack of air conditioning, and science labs. Schools in Baltimore also average 50 years in age, which implies that most of the structures like roofs and windows and mechanical systems are outdated and far past their useful life. You may have heard the governor blame the issue on mismanagement, but anyone who owns a house knows that it costs money to maintain. And by engineering standards, Baltimore City should have been investing $200 million to $250 million a year in capital renewal of their facilities, but they've only been getting about 30 to 50 million over the past few decades. With this paltry level of investment, we can expect schools to fall apart. So in this slide, here are all the schools in Baltimore City. Before we wrote our report, Buildings for Academic Excellence in 2010, and mounted an enormous campaign with grassroots advocates to secure additional funding, pretty much all of these schools were in very poor condition. And that's represented by red. So most of those buildings would have been red. Excuse me. But in 2013, we passed an innovative bill, an innovative financing bill that established a $1 billion school construction program for the city of Baltimore. Since then, 16 schools have been completely renovated or rebuilt, and there are 12 more in the under construction now. So you can see the blue schools represent the $1 billion program that we got passed in 2013. So by the end of the program, 28 schools would be fully gutted, rebuilt, or newly constructed. And there's also these schools here in gray that have to close because the city has been losing enrollment and there's a lot of excess and empty buildings. There were only 16 schools when we started that were in good condition. That's on the far right in green. And the schools in red are in poor condition. The schools in yellow here on the right bottom are in fair condition. And a bill that we passed this year, the Built to Learn Act, provides $2.2 billion statewide for school construction. So this is going to touch every county. Baltimore City will get another $420 million to expand the 21st century program that will fully rebuild, renovate, newly construct schools, and that will be up to 10 schools with that amount. So we're definitely putting a dent in this issue. Okay, you can remove the slide. And lastly, I want to talk about a new education issue that was brought to us by many Black and brown parents and students in Baltimore City and around the state. And this has to do with ensuring that schools are anti-racist. We have to acknowledge that the way teaching and learning is delivered, the content of the curriculum, and the way that school staff interact with students and families are not designed for Black and brown people. Anti-racism framework for schools means that the lives of Black and brown students are centered in the curriculum, and pedagogical approach to teaching and learning, and done so in a way that is life affirming, so that Black and brown children develop a strong sense of identity and are able to process the racism that many of them have internalized. This session, there were 3 different bills that sought to develop content on multicultural education and African American history content and standards. I worked with a group of parents and students from 8 different counties in Maryland. They delivered compelling testimonies as to why these bills were important and highlighted incidents where teachers made dehumanizing contents about a student's hair or made a disparaging assumption about their academic ability or discredited the Black Lives Matter movement. Unfortunately, these bills were never brought to the floor for a vote for various reasons that I won't get into now. But without anti-racism framework for schools, a curriculum that is inclusive and representative of the multicultural cultures that exist in our schools, and comprehensive race equity training for teachers, these kinds of infractions will persist and continue to cause harm to Black and Brown students. So we will press forward with this work, and with the new coalition we helped to form, Antiracism for Maryland Schools, we are planning a series of town halls and symposiums on this issue for the fall. So please stay tuned. Thanks again for your support. And now we'll hear from Sergio Espana, our Engagement and Mobilization Director. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. And apologies if I'm going to be a little bit brief here, but I just want to make sure that we respect everyone's time and we make space for the questions that folks have been asking in the chat. In the meantime, while I'm talking, there might be a few that could be answered directly without needing to lift it up. So just wanted to flag that just to help folks out. So again, on my end, I'm Sergio Espana. I'm the Director of Engagement and Mobilization. It's our newest department, explicitly focused on organizing and on building and following the leadership of directly impacted Marylanders, which includes our membership and includes our plaintiffs and includes folks that aren't thinking about themselves in terms of the ACLU, but are thinking about themselves in terms of being aware of their rights and knowing that they have a responsibility to fight for them, provided that they are also able to build together. And so I wanted to just real quickly go back to when we were talking about like this grant. Like we've been very intentional these last 3 years on having really spending time on identifying like what our strategic priorities are and making sure that how we're identifying them is not an internal process, but it's one that is built off of the leadership of our members and folks directly impacted across the state. As you've heard over the last 40 minutes from our legal team, our engagement team, our policy team, we have based our priorities from the community. It's not from something that's been bubbling internally. Now, with that said, there's so much to take on, and so we need to figure out how to prioritize this in a way that's responsive and holds us accountable, and that's also impactful. And so I just want to very quickly share from our strategic plan so far, just as a reminder, where our mission and vision is as our focus points. Our mission is that the ACLU of Maryland exists to empower Marylanders to exercise their rights so that the law values and uplifts their humanity. And our hope is that through that, we'll accomplish our vision of Maryland's people united in affirming and exercising our rights in order to address inequities and fulfill not just the state's, but the country's unrealized promise of justice and freedom for all. And with those as a guide, we've identified the following core priorities that we've already been digging into, but we're going to continue to build over the next several years. Obviously, you've heard about education and a bit about our justice system. We're also taking on issues of an individual autonomy, ensuring that there isn't government intrusion that's continuing to creep up. On that note, also making sure that the public institutions are accountable to the public, so focusing on government accountability, voting rights, and immigrants' rights. For the sake of time, I'm just going to highlight our work on immigrants and voting rights as it relates, particularly within our organizing lens, but cross-department. So if we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about what impact we've been able to have thanks to y'all's support as we've been able to build out a more explicit organizing capacity within the affiliate that's been based off of the ongoing organizing efforts that our legislative and legal teams have been doing, frankly, for decades. So just a couple of highlights for the last year is we were able to successfully end our IGSA agreement. So this is a partnership between ICE and the local detention center in Howard County, and we're able to successfully establish a local trust act. We also successfully prevented a private detention center from being built in Queen Anne's County, working directly with Queen Anne's County residents. The overwhelming majority of folks wouldn't necessarily identify as progressive, but through our conversations understood how this was unfair to the immigrant community and in no way a benefit to them. We also successfully sued, obviously this is with legal's leadership, but with the participation of our coalition, the RISE Coalition of Western Maryland, we successfully sued the Frederick Sheriff's Department in a discrimination case to where the Sheriff's Office not only had to issue an apology directly, but has also made some efforts to address racial disparities. Unfortunately, it's very clear that that is not a priority for this office as it stands right now. And as Kaelin mentioned, thanks to these local pushes in some of these counties, we were able to help demonstrate how much there is both a need and an appetite for meaningful immigration reform at a state level, hence why we were able to pass the Dignity Not Detention bill. And as Kaelin mentioned, we are going to be now focused on ensuring that there's a veto override as soon as session picks back up to ensure that these types of partnerships with local detention centers can happen and that we don't allow private facilities to creep up. So along with that, as a priority over the next year, we're also making moves to support efforts on the lower shore. So I know there's folks here that are coming from Talbot and from Cecil County and hopefully from other places on the shore. I really encourage you all to check out our website. We're currently hiring for a campaign strategist to complement local leadership efforts around immigrant rights and around racist, we're pushing back against racist policies, particularly when it comes to policing across the shore. So please share with your networks. And also wanted to quickly talk about some of the efforts we've been doing on voting rights, and then I will wrap us up. So I'm just aware that we're definitely running a bit over time. So last year, obviously, absolutely pivotal election. Obviously, candidates say that every time, but all of us have lived through it. We know just how close we were to the precipice last year and how we're not exactly that far behind it yet. And so to that end, thanks to working in partnership with our legal team, and particularly Amy Cruz, we have this network of election protection volunteers in every county in the state who are at the ready, not just on election day, and not just during early voting, but even beforehand, to be tracking issues across each county to identify where there could be a need for potential legal investigation or for a push for transparency. And through that, we were able to address pretty serious issues in time. So including voter suppression issues in Montgomery and Calvert counties and misinformation in Carroll County. Over the next years, unquestionably our priority, and I think this is one of the questions in the chat, is ensuring that every eligible Marylander has access to the ballot. And when we see eligible Marylander, we mean every Marylander. And so that includes every single Marylander who's currently incarcerated. Right now, some folks have access to the ballot while they're behind bars. We think it's absolutely crucial that that suffrage is not taken away, especially as Sonia was pointing out how intentional our prison system is on undermining the Black community's voice and power. And so that is going to be a priority for us, along with ensuring that the protections that are in place to ensure that everyone's ballot currently continue to stay there. And the last thing I'll mention, and we'll turn over to questions after we hear a couple of additional action steps, is just a reminder of how we're approaching this work. And so just very quickly, we want to go to the next slide just to wrap up. As you've heard, it's not that we're focused on, we have a litigative strategy, we have an organizing strategy, we have a policy strategy. It's that we want to have clear results that directly impact disenfranchised Marylanders for the long haul, both at an individual level, but also definitely at scale, and in a way that is responsive to what Marylanders are saying are their priorities. And so, thankfully, as you've heard over the last 40 minutes, I'm very, very grateful to be in this affiliate with Dana's leadership and everyone's input here and co-leadership of having us. We're starting to get, thanks to y'all's support as well, getting better and better at figuring out how we're using all of our different skills to get results. And so we appreciate y'all making the time and the support that you've continued to provide for us as we continue our mission. With that, I'll turn it over to Howie.
Thanks, Sergio, and everyone. So, gosh, let's take a second to reflect. You heard about changes to the legal justice system, progress in police accountability, incarceration, immigration, all of the civil rights and civil liberties issues in Maryland that you care about, we care about, and we are making progress. So as we look forward, what do we do next? In addition to giving, of course, we appreciate your gifts that power our work here. We also encourage you to call your state delegates and senators, in particular right now to override Governor Hogan's veto of Senate Bill 202, the politics out of parole bill that Sonia mentioned at the beginning. In addition, if you're interested in getting involved or providing feedback on public policy work, Kaelin's information is on the screen, so take a picture or check it out on our website. And certainly last but not least, just stay engaged with us. You know, we're active on social media. We are working from our home offices every day, and we really want to have your participation in all of the work that we do. And so thank you. Please stay with us. And last but not least, we're going to do a quick poll and let Ellen facilitate some Q&A. Y'all have sent in some great questions. Ellen?
Thanks, Howie. So we had one great question come in, and I'm going to direct this first to Kaelin, but if anyone else would like to weigh in, you're more than welcome to. So we had a question about what does local control mean? And who was previously in control of the Baltimore Police Department?
Great question. Thank you. Local control means allowing for the Baltimore City Council to have the ability to legislate and pass ordinance as it pertains to the police department. Currently, the police department is deemed a state agency under state control. So where there is policy changes that want to be made, those changes have to be made during the 90-day legislative session in the Maryland General Assembly in Annapolis, as opposed to in City Council at City Hall, whereas every other jurisdiction in our state and every other police department is within, can do that with the county councils.
Great. Looks like Frank already answered all of the questions directed to him. Frank, if you'd like to elaborate on anything verbally.
Well, I think one question that someone asked, I think maybe only the person who asked got the response. The question was, what is the basis for the claim that Baltimore is the third best funded district in the country? And I wrote that the data that they use only includes the 100 largest school districts in the nation. It's mostly of Latinx students. These districts are historically underfunded, so the comparison is flawed. If all school districts are included, especially wealthy suburban districts, Baltimore City ranks somewhere around 3,500th best funded district. And counties like Howard and Montgomery County here in Maryland have just about the same per pupil funding as Baltimore City, despite having a much less needy population. And I put needy in quotes because that's a horrible word. So that's why we need an equitable formula that puts a lot more funding for resources for lower income districts and districts with large populations of Black and brown students.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap. It was wonderful for all of you to join us here today. Thank you so much for your support of the ACLU. The final poll question is up. It looks like most of you heard about this through Dana's email. Some of you also heard about it through staff. That's wonderful. Keep in touch. You'll definitely hear from us. It was great spending an hour with you. And thanks so much to our team for making time. And it's 1:58. I guess we'll see you all very soon. Take care.